Hello, and welcome to the second annual Reviewing Every Game I Played in X Year Awards. I'm your host, Macca, and 2020 has been one heck of a year, hasn't it? So much tragedy has taken place, and for many people, myself included, it's reaffirmed the importance of video games in our lives. Oh yes, a question?
Hey, if you're hosting an award show, why aren't you all dressed up?
Because. Now, I think the most important thing to remember—
No, seriously, it's pretty unprofessional to just wear your casual clothing.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut the hell up! I don't want to wear a suit, okay? My dad says I need to get a real job and wear a suit all day. I don't want to wear a suit, okay? Just because you don't understand how YouTube works and it isn't a traditional job doesn't mean it's not legitimate. I'm not gonna put on a suit just to meet your criteria for being successful in life. I'm not going to join the family law firm and settle down at the age of 21 and pop out like 12 children like the rest of the family. I just want to be me, Dad. Let's get on with the show. Control was a fantastic way to start off 2020 for me. The first half is somewhat bland, and all of what makes this game truly great is in the latter part. But when you finally do get to the good stuff, it is oh so good. Remedy's protagonists have always been memorable, and Jesse is a very strong contender who's only second to Alan Wake. The story is amazingly good with some really strong set pieces, though again it all comes in the back half of the game. In the first half it starts off interesting, but it really feels like not a whole lot happens until you get to the containment sector. It also tries to have a Metroidvania-styled map, but in the end, it feels like a worse version of Metroid Fusion. The most you'll find are weapon and personal mods, which you'll have long since been drowning in. I love the idea of a Metroidvania-styled Remedy game, but this really didn't work super well. It also doesn't help that the game runs like ass on PS4. Play this game on literally anything else, I am begging you. Hell, play the Switch version if you have good enough internet. Literally anything is better than this. As for the Foundation and AWE DLCs, I enjoyed them fine enough. The Foundation offers more interesting tidbits on the lore of Control and where the series will go in the future, while AWE acts more as a setup for Alan Wake 2. In terms of gameplay, the Foundation is the more interesting, offering more unique environments and actually introducing new gameplay mechanics. AWE is more about offering a throwback to Alan Wake's gameplay, with a ton of it involving light-based puzzles. After beating both, I went online to see what people were saying about them, and I was surprised to find a number of people didn't like AWE. From what I could gather, I think people's expectations for what it would be just got out of whack. The DLC was never meant to push forward the plot of Control, it was meant to set up Alan Wake 2. Regardless, Control is a fantastic game that gets the Reaffirms My Love for the Developer award. Spec Ops: The Line is an average game held up by a great story that I'm very glad exists. Things like gunplay, aesthetic, and initial story is very basic and does nothing to make it look like anything more than a generic third-person military shooter. While I'm sure this is the main reason it failed financially, I think it's better off for it. The game acts as a deconstruction and criticism of military shooters like Call of Duty and its many knockoffs, so it looking like one of those knockoffs adds to it. While I had an idea of how the game would unfold going in, I still found myself getting emotionally invested in the story and characters. I was disgusted and uncomfortable with the atrocities committed throughout, and there even came a point towards the end where I felt the same enjoyment in sending a message as Captain Walker. There's something to be said about the game forcing you to do these horrible acts and then chastising you for it, but I personally didn't mind it a whole lot. It's a really solid game in a genre that was once oversaturated, and I'm gonna have to give it the I'm glad it exists award. It's been about 10 years since I last played Mega Man 01, and the game is still really good. It's definitely aged the worst out of all of the games in this collection though. The idea of having almost every level connect to each other is interesting, but in execution it doesn't work out very well. You also revisit every level at least twice, and it never really changes things enough to warrant the return. The story is also the worst of the games, though it's definitely not bad. The game really does feel like it's trying to lay the groundwork for the phenomenal sequels that would come later, and for that, I'm giving it the Solid Start award. Mega Man Zero 2 is an immense improvement over the original. Not only is the level design and the overall structure of the game better, but the additions of EX skills and forms makes this game a ton of fun to play, and one that actually rewards me for maintaining at least an A rank throughout. It gets the I Can't Believe Departure is still the best song in all of Mega Man award. God, this game... Sonic Forces just sucks. Both Sonic Colors and Generations hit it out of the park, but this game fucks all of it up. The level design is awful and short, the gameplay is unfocused and tries to please everyone while pleasing no one. The story is awful, and classic Sonic just existing here at all is the most cynical thing Sega could have possibly done. The boost formula isn't bad, this game just fucks it all up. The concept of the story isn't bad, the people they have writing Sonic games now fucked it all up because they're just awful at writing stories that are anything other than low scale and not meant to be taken seriously. The idea behind this game isn't bad. Sega just fucked it all up by using all the wrong people and trying to make a game that would please the lowest common denominator. I give Sonic Forces the Fucked It All Up award. Doom 2 has higher highs and lower lows compared to the original. Some maps are some of the best in the series, while others are just boring. Though it never gets as bad as Thy Flesh Consumed. Not much else to say, it's a solid sequel. It gets the Solid Sequel award. New Horizons is genuinely a great game, but like with every Animal Crossing, it just didn't hold my attention for the year plus they want players to be playing it. In New Leaf, this wasn't an issue because that game was packed with tons of content and things to do. New Horizons, however, was missing a number of things from New Leaf at launch that they added back in later updates. That's not a bad idea, but it results in the game having glaring omissions during the time I was actually playing. The crafting system and being able to customize my island is fantastic, but things that I've come to love and expect out of Animal Crossing were just missing. Sure, if they haven't been added to the game by now, it'll likely come eventually, but I stopped playing this game all the way back in June. My experience with it is only what was there in those first 3 months of quarantine. I think that in the years to come, New Horizons will become the definitive Animal Crossing game, but as it stood when it released, it was just missing something. I give it the, I'm sure it's going to be amazing a few years from now, but I'm just already checked out award. Doom Eternal is probably my favorite Doom game. I liked it better than 2016 even. The selection of weapons, the music, the story, all the various mechanics, collectibles, the level variety, it's all just so good. I really don't even know what to say. Doom Eternal is the Devil May Cry of first-person shooters, both in its level design and in how fucking complex the combat system is. I just love this game. The only other thing I can say is I don't understand why people hate the platforming. It's an excellent pace breaker. It allows for more movement options in battle. It's tight and easy to control, and it makes finding secrets fun and interesting. Doom was never a series exclusively about combat. All the classic games were a solid balance between combat and exploration, and even then you never needed to participate in the combat. Some levels you could plow through the whole thing without firing a single shot. Hell, Doom 2 even had platforming, but unlike Eternal, it was complete and utter ass due to it not being able to look up or down. I genuinely don't understand all the hate for Eternal's platforming. Doom Eternal gets the Best Devil May Cry Game award. I feel bad for Resident Evil 3. Not only does it have to follow up one of, if not the greatest remake of all time in Resident Evil 2, but it also released just a week before the most anticipated remake of all time in Final Fantasy VII. Now, it's impossible to talk about the RE3 remake without comparing it to its predecessor. Resident Evil 3 is just weaker in so many ways, and you could tell the people behind this remake had a completely different mindset than the ones behind Resident Evil 2. In the original games, Mr. X only felt like he was following you everywhere, when in reality, he was made to appear at certain sections and only chased you until you left the area. Nemesis, meanwhile, was Mr. X on steroids, actually being able to follow you through rooms and rearing his head in standard gameplay often. When the Resident Evil 2 remake came out, Mr. X was turned into Nemesis on mega steroids, literally following you throughout the entire police station for the majority of the time you spend there, and being incredibly hard to kill. His stomping was genuinely terrifying as you sat in one of the few places he couldn't go, waiting for him to get far enough away that he wouldn't be a problem. In the Resident Evil 3 remake, Nemesis somehow feels like a poor man's version of Mr. X, appearing only in specific situations, with most of those sections either being boss fights or hold forward to not die sequences. You'd think the obvious choice would be to make Nemesis like Mr. X, but instead they decided to make him like Birkin. Nemesis isn't as fast as Mr. X, he's not as intimidating, and he's nowhere near as hard to down. I was able to get him down on his knee with a single grenade the second the first proper chase sequence started, meaning I got to spend the rest of it taking my time as I made my way through linear, bland, boring level design that was literally just straight lines. Resident Evil 2's maps were labyrinthian mazes, requiring you to snake in and out of areas constantly as you tried to solve the various puzzles within. In Resident Evil 3, the maps were so straightforward and simplistic, they make the game feel infinitely shorter than it actually was. And it actually is pretty short, clocking in at 4 hours for most people. Sure, Resident Evil games are about replaying it over and over for better scores and unlocking new weapons, but I was so unimpressed with what I played, I have little interest in actually replaying this game. Meanwhile, I played RE2 Make 4 times over. Oh yeah, and there are only 2 puzzles on the default difficulty modes. This game is just so underwhelming and rushed. The only things I can really praise this game for are Jill and Carlos. Their characterization and the actors' performances were stellar, even better than Leon and Claire in 2. I still think that gameplay and atmosphere-wise, this is the direction the series should go in, but Resident Evil 3 is just a disappointing follow-up to one of the greatest remakes, let alone greatest games of all time. Resident Evil 3 gets the good game but disappointing sequel award. It is impossible to talk about the Final Fantasy VII Remake without all of the baggage attached to it. The topic of how this isn't actually a remake and is actually a reimagining has been done to death, so I won't repeat it all here. I'm just gonna give my honest-to-God thoughts on the game. I kind of loved it. The combat is the perfect blend of action and turn-based, making for a system that retains the visceral fun of real-time combat and the satisfying strategic combat of turn-based. All 4 characters are fun to play as, each offering a different way of playing. Though I gotta be honest, I gotta disagree with a lot of people who said that Tifa was their favorite to play as. Now, for the real elephant in the room. The lengthening of Midgard into a full game and the various changes made throughout. For the record, the only Final Fantasy VII game I've played is Crisis Core. Take a guess who my favorite character is. In fact, I bought the original Final Fantasy VII after I bought the remake, but I did play it first. I played all the way up to the Nibelheim flashback in Calm before properly starting the remake. I did this so I could have the context and ability to reference what was being added and what was changed. And real talk, I prefer the remake. I still really enjoyed what the original game did, and in a number of ways I prefer how it handled certain things. But the remake expands upon it in ways that make it feel much more realized. While I'm not fully satisfied with how little of Midgard we really got to explore in both games, I feel like I know the Midgard in the remake so much better, and I feel like I explored more of it. However, I'd say about half of what they did to lengthen the game was done poorly. Side quests are boring and way too stock to justify any real emotional investment. The side characters range from fun to boring, and sequences that were stretched out from the original in order to pad the game out were stretched way too thin, almost entirely across the board. To me, the worst part of the game was either going to the second reactor and having to deal with the sun lamps, or the utterly pointless and unnecessary ghost children in the train yard. However, I honestly really liked how they handled climbing up to Shinra HQ, even if the skybox was but ugly. Groundbox? And that's another thing, the game is utterly beautiful, but every once in a while you'd come across a really bad texture or character model that just looks jarringly bad when placed next to Cloud. And again, what the fuck was up with the Skyground boxes? They're so flat and ugly. As for the story changes, I really like what Nomura Kitase and company were going for, but the execution was wonky. There are amazing changes, such as making Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse actual characters. Well, Wedge and Jesse. And the chapter where you go visit Jesse's parents, but then there are things like the aforementioned child ghosts. Now, I bet you're wondering what I think of the retcon ghosts, which are different from the child ghosts. Again, I really like them, but towards the end, the execution of them was awkward. This coupled with dialogue that, while easy to understand what is being said, is stupidly vague, creates an experience way too akin to Kingdom Hearts for my liking, and I like Kingdom Hearts. Regardless, I love this game, and I'm pretty eagerly excited to see where this remake series goes next. Depending on how future entries go, we could end up with either a Metal Gear Solid 2, or we could end up with a Metal Gear Solid 5. In either case, I'm sure to enjoy it, even if it's for utterly different reasons. Final Fantasy VII Remake wins the Aerith is best girl, she's actually the tomboy between her and Tifa, I don't care if she has no ass award. I spent about 2 years and around $140 gathering all 3 Xenosaga games, and after about a year and a half of owning all of them, I finally got around to actually playing them. These games are the only ones in the Xeno series that I have yet to play, and after playing episode 1, I really do appreciate a lot of what this game did. The story, characters, and lore are really interesting, and seeing its own version of Perfect Works is fascinating. The gameplay is also pretty fun, being a different take on Xenogears' great combat that I'm glad to see was iterated on. But it genuinely feels like it took half the game for anything to happen, and by the time it's over, it feels like very little progress has been made. Despite this, I did enjoy my time with episode 1. However, I definitely prefer Xenogears as a whole over it. Xenosaga's gameplay feels much slower than Gears, probably due to the move to proper 3D models. The cutscenes can be awkward with how quiet they can be, the stiff animations, and the passable voice acting. To be fair, the game was released in 2001 and it was Monolith Soft's first game. The music ranges from great to... I'm giving Xenosaga Episode 1 Der Wille zur Macht the 10 out of 10, best game. I made it is a good game on Xenoblade back when it came out, so I won't repeat what I said in that. What I will say, however, is that as a remake slash remaster, it really felt like there were a number of things Monolith Soft could have done to improve the game further. The biggest being fixing the AI for your party so they're not as brain dead. Despite this, Xenoblade is still perpetually vying with Metal Gear Solid 3 as my favorite game of all time in my head. So as long as that game wasn't ruined in any way, I was going to love Definitive Edition. And thankfully, none of the changes made to the game worsened it in any way. As for Future Connected, I think it's a solid enough epilogue that could have been better, but ultimately serves its purpose as one last hurrah for Shulk and Melia while setting up the future of the series. If you want to know my full thoughts on everything from the story to the gameplay, you can also go watch my Is a Good Game on it. Much like Control's AWE DLC, I think a lot of fans' expectations for Future Connected were blown out of proportion. Many were expecting something on the level of Torna, but that was just never going to be the case. Torna was big enough to warrant a standalone release, while Future Connected was bundled along with the remake. I was never expecting some grand story that connects the worlds of Xenoblade 1, 2, X, Xenosaga, and Xenogears, nor an 80-hour-long adventure like the base game. I was expecting one last story with 2 of the most popular characters in the series, while introducing a few new ones and laying the groundwork for future titles to follow. And that's what I got. I think part of the reason why so many fans were disappointed with Future Connected is because they just don't fully understand the seeds that Monolith Soft were planting here. It's a shame, but what can you do? I give Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition the I really hope X2 is the next game in this series award, while I give Future Connected the please go play Xenosaga award. Hey, hot take, The Last of Us Part 2 isn't anywhere near the two extremes people online act like it is. It isn't a dumpster fire with no redeeming qualities that does nothing but glorify the violence it attempts to decry, and it also isn't a 10 on 10 mind-blowing game that ushers video games and by extension gamers into the next realm. Back when I beat the game, I went and posted my thoughts on Twitter, so I'm just gonna try and repackage what I said in a way that better reflects my stance as I've gotten further and further away from it. The Last of Us Part 2 has some of the best acting I've ever seen in a video game, let alone a movie. The Last of Us Part 2 also has some of the worst written scenes I have ever seen, with the epitome being that god-awful sex scene midway through the game. It's manipulative, injecting details into the plot that serve little to no purpose other than to cause drama and to make the player feel bad. It subverts tropes before doing them anyway later in the game. It tries to cover so many topics, and in doing so, it loses focus, and I just stop caring. I'm trying to stay spoiler-free in this video, but I feel the need to address one particular aspect of The Last of Us Part 2 that had become infamous before the game even released. The second half of the game where you play as Abby starts with a god-awful retcon and a boring as fuck first day, where the only story you're going to be experiencing is the most generic love triangle between some of the most unlikable characters I have ever seen, as well as the first of two cutscenes in which Jeffrey Wright is utterly wasted on an absolutely nothing character. However, once you get to Abby's Day 2, things start to change. It still has its moments of bad, but the good starts to shine through. I understand what this game was trying to do, and to a degree, it succeeds. It takes risks, and not all of them work. I had seen the leaks prior to its release, and at the time, I thought they sounded awful. But I wanted to hold off until I saw how the game executed these ideas. And for what I was spoiled on, it does it all very well. I genuinely believe this game is overhated and overpraised by everyone all over the internet for frankly unfair and ludicrous reasons. It has tons of problems that it deserves to be criticized for, but that just isn't what people are actually talking about. There's a saying many people know that I feel is applicable here. Show, don't tell. Don't simply tell people the story, show it to them. Let us see it as it happens so we can react naturally. And I honest to God think people are simply just being told what happens and are acting like utter fucknuts for believing just reading a synopsis on Wikipedia gives them the same experience as playing the game for themselves. Oh, yeah, The Last of Us is supposed to be a video game. It's the first game again, but with a few different weapons. It doesn't feel as janky, and you can go prone. It upgrades the original's gameplay from passable to fine/good. That's it. The Last of Us Part 2 gets the I can't believe we got two Metal Gear Solid 2s in the same year award. The original Battle for Bikini Bottom was one of my favorite games growing up, so being able to return to it all these years later was a treat. While the game has shown its age in terms of its core design, I personally didn't mind it as it helped keep the game somewhat challenging as I, a 23-year-old at the time, played it. My biggest issue with this remaster, however, was how blatantly rushed it was. What resulted was a game with awful pop-in, blurry textures ripped straight from the original game, and various glitches scattered throughout the entire experience. I genuinely think Purple Lamp Studios has what it takes to make a brand new Spongebob game that's good, but they need to be given enough time to make it run well. There is zero reason any version of this game should run the way it does, even on the Switch. SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated gets the you were rushed in order to release at the same time as a new movie, but that movie got delayed into next year, so now you're left as a buggy, unfinished product award. Paper Mario: The Origami King is easily the best game in the modern era of the series. Much like with Xenoblade, I made a is a good game on it, so if you want to get a better idea of my thoughts, go check that out. I really can't say much more about it than what I said there. While the video only covers the first chapter, I had written it when I was over halfway done with the game, and my thoughts just didn't change after beating it. Paper Mario the Origami King gets the "it's fine, it's good" award. I didn't forget that I played Shantae, and as a result have to type and record this literally last minute. Seven Sirens is a good game. Shantae is a fantastic series. It's super underrated. Seven Sirens is better than Half Genie Hero in terms of its level design because I like the Metroidvania style for the series. But in terms of content, it feels like it's seriously lacking, especially compared to Half Genie. So that's kind of unfair because Half Genie only got that much content because it was a Kickstarter. I'm rambling. Pirate's Curse is still the best in the series, but this is still a great game. I can't wait for the next one. You know, I was almost positive the oldest genie lady was going to be the bad guy, and boy, was I super wrong. Go buy Seven Sirens and also the entire Shantae series. It's all on the Switch. Just go buy them, play them. They're fantastic. Shantae and the Seven Sirens gets the "I didn't forget it because it's bad, I forgot because I'm oblivious" award. Ghost of Tsushima is the last proper hurrah for the PS4, and I genuinely think it is the best note the system could have gone out on. While the first act of the game didn't do too much to impress me, Acts 2 and 3 surprised me with how much I loved them. While I don't think the story is anything truly revolutionary, Tsushima is able to get me to care about the plot in the same way Devil May Cry makes me care about all the stupid shit that happens in that series. Well-written, endearing characters that I genuinely like and want to see what happens to them. Outside of Lady Masako, I didn't care too much for the actual plots of the side quests, but the reason I did every piece of story content was to see what would happen to the characters. Lord Shimura, Yuna, Taka, Ishikawa, Lady Masako, Kenji, and Jin are all characters I came to love as I played, and their interpersonal relationships are what drove me forward. That, plus some fantastically directed scenes, took the game from a 7 or an 8 to a 9 out of 10 for me. Act 1 could seriously use some work in both the story and gameplay department, but Acts 2 and 3 are genuinely great. Definitely the best PlayStation 4 exclusive game this year. I give Ghost of Tsushima the "probably should have taken more from Breath of the Wild" award. Xenosaga Episode 2 is without a doubt the absolute worst Xeno game I have played, and I have played every one except the weird Xenosaga spin-offs and Xenosaga Episode 3. While it felt like it took half the game for things to really start happening in Episode 1, Episode 2, it feels like things happen in the middle and at the end, with nothing happening in between. But don't get me wrong, things happen. But in terms of things that matter, it feels like nothing happens. But unlike the first game, where things were at least paced well, in Episode 2, it feels like story sections and dungeons are drawn way beyond the point of tolerability. I think the biggest offender is the forest dungeon you enter about a fourth of the way through the game, where you watch about 30 minutes of story happen before cutting to a fine enough dungeon, before watching another 30 minutes of story, before cutting back to the same dungeon, but it's covered in snow now and the last room is different. However, despite all of this, the game was actually able to make me care about Junior and Momo, when the first one had me finding them annoyingly edge and annoyingly cringe. Though I still find Junior edgy as shit, I just actually give a damn about him now. Xenosaga Episode 2, Jenseits von Gut und Böse, gets the "worst game I played this year" award. Super Mario 64 is a great game that has aged poorly, and even then, when I was younger, I still never liked it as much as the games that came later. Call me a Zoomer hipster, but I kinda think it's overrated. It's still super important in video game history, and for that, I respect it immensely. Super Mario 64 gets the "it's good, but not as good as people say" award. Mario Sunshine is a great game, but it's also easily the worst 3D Mario game. It feels rushed with the lack of levels, blue coins, and wonky physics, but it makes up for its shortcomings with fantastic level design, incredibly tight controls, and probably my favorite location in the Mario universe. I really love it when Nintendo puts in the effort to properly build the world surrounding Mario instead of just doing the same shit they've done since Super Mario World. Super Mario Sunshine gets the Seriously Don't Call Me a Hipster award. I went into Yakuza 7, yes, I'm calling it Yakuza 7 because that's what it is, apprehensive. Not because of the change in cast, but because of the change in gameplay. I didn't want a series I grew to love partly because of the uniqueness of its combat, to abandon it for a combat style that's not at all hard to come by. Thankfully, while I still wish they hadn't changed the combat, I ended up loving what they replaced it with. Gameplay-wise, it's one of the best the series has to offer, easily placing it up there with Judgment and Yakuza 0. In terms of its story, while it has some of my favorite moments in the entire series as well as one of the strongest endings, I think the plot is bloated and needed to have ended about 3 chapters earlier, give or take. Plot points are needlessly introduced as late as chapter 14, and it just makes the plot feel messy at times. Not to mention, there are various quirks throughout the story that either didn't make sense to me or felt incredibly contrived, such as the character of Nonomiya. In the end, it's still a fantastic game and one that leaves me feeling hopeful for the future of this series. It also did the power of friendship in a way that didn't feel cheesy or inorganic, which is a major plus in my book. Yakuza 7, Like a Dragon, gets the Insert Obligatory Go Watch My Is a Good Game on It Comment Here award. Can we talk about how 4 months ago we didn't even know this game existed? Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is an amazing follow-up to the original Hyrule Warriors and a solid prequel asterisk to Breath of the Wild. Much like how the original Hyrule Warriors expertly fused the gameplay of a Warriors title with Zelda elements, AOC is able to do the same with Breath of the Wild's gameplay, with arguably even more successful results. While the general controls and combat feel Warriors, the game looks like Breath of the Wild in every way possible, perfectly emulating the source material, for better or worse. When the game draws level design straight from Breath of the Wild, it doesn't always work well with the camera system at play. The world was designed for a slower, more explorative style of play with a camera that was made with that in mind. Age of Calamity, however, is much faster paced than Breath of the Wild ever was, and it's paired with a camera that was chosen to work better with it. This causes some pretty bad camera problems in tight areas such as Gerudo Town and climbing up enemy bases with multiple floors. The problem gets even worse when you introduce bigger characters like Daruk and Invisible Walls. Another issue more commonly talked about is the game's performance. While it does get better the further into the game you get, it never runs super well. If the rumors of a Switch Pro are true, I'd recommend waiting to play the game on that. They don't ruin anything, but it's distracting and can make the game harder to play at times. Age of Calamity also perfectly merges the adventure and story modes from the original Hyrule Warriors. Not only can you level up characters and unlock new weapons for Link, but you can even unlock new moves for every character. That, plus a story that's pretty damn solid throughout that I actually quite liked. Until a certain thing happens that The story's not bad, it's executed well, I just hate the entire concept of this one choice with it. Regardless, AOC is a fantastic game that succeeds at making me even more excited for Breath of the Wild 2. I'm gonna have to give Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity the... Wait, did we just get 3 Metal Gear Solid 2s in 1 year? Award. Now it's the moment you've all been waiting for. My game of the year. And the winner goes is Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. What else did you expect? I literally said it's tied with Metal Gear Solid 3 for my favorite game of all time. It's going to be my game of the year any year it comes out in. I hope you all enjoyed the show. Make sure to tip your waitresses, wear a mask, subscribe and hit the bell, and eat your veggies.
This isn't every game you played this year. What about Among Us? Fall Guys? Cyberpunk?
If I didn't talk about a game, it's because I didn't play enough of it, or it just didn't leave an impression on me. And have you seen Cyberpunk? It isn't finished. Why would I talk about it now?
Why were some of those segments shorter than others? Did you think those games suck or something?
This video is already over 30 minutes long. Do you want it to be even longer?
Why didn't you play Persona 5 Royale?
Alice, you West, get out of here!